Hey everybody, I'm going to give you a little guided tour of the mix session for one of the songs from the Evergrey record that I worked on, which is the new one that's about to come out called Theories of Emptiness. This was one of my favourite projects to have worked on. It was probably the big project that I did last year in 2023. I had such a great time working with these guys. They're a super experienced band of just like really good, honest, earnest, authentic people. And it made for such a great feeling working on this whole record. And I think the music is brilliant as well. And that kind of authenticity is something that I really wanted to make sure came through in the mix, in the way that the record sounds, in the sounds that we chose to use. And by that, I mean using, natural performances, using the equipment that the guys themselves have chosen to use, that they play live or that they're favorite pieces, making sure that things aren't like hyper edited and auto-tuned, and just overall that the sound has a little bit of life and movement to it, a bit more like you'd get like if you went to see them at like an amazing live concert with like studio quality sound, basically. So that was the goal. And I'm pleased to say that it seems like the public have reacted really well to the songs and the sound, and I hope it brings lots and lots of continued success for Evergrey. Anyway, let's get into it. So this song it's the second single. I think it's a really easy song to like. It's got a real stomping riff, great chorus. It's got a bridge section that's kind of quite doomy in a way, in an Evergrey kind of way. It's just great fun. Let me hit play. If you haven't heard it, you can check it out a little bit. I'll just kind of skip through the song a bit. So let's actually take a listen to what's at the top of this session, which is the demo. So this is the final kind of structure that the guys put together as something that they exported out. The drums are still programmed, I think, on it. The vocal takes are far from final. In fact, I think they're very much just Tom sketching the ideas out. You can hear he's using autotune to, change notes around, just playing with the melodies a little bit still at this point. So it's just funny. I've got it in the session here because it allows me to kind of reference what the band were going for in terms of the balance of certain things like the keys and guitars in each section. Makes it so that I can just get closer to exactly what they want on my first try. And also, it means that I can make it so that it's not too much of a sonic whiplash for them when they hear my mix, that it's still got a lot of the things which they've spent a lot of time balancing on their end. So let's just take a little listen. So from the top. So as you can hear, I think the keys, the guitars, the bass, all of that sounds pretty final as it sounds in my mix, but the drums aren't. It's just an interesting snapshot of where the band let go of the sound and where I took over. Where can we start? I guess the drums probably are a good place to start. So once it was decided that I was going to work with them on this record, I was really keen to actually get to kind of go and hang out in person. They wanted to record and did record the majority of their tracks at their rehearsal space, which is it's actually the control room of an existing studio that had been decommissioned. It's actually been recommissioned now. I think it's called Studio Borhus. I think I've got that right. Kind of famous Gothenburg studio. But yeah, they had the part that would have been the console room. It didn't have the console in there. It's just an empty space. It's very dry sounding, like very dead acoustically, which is not really the ideal situation for rock and roll drums, where you want them to be a bit big and boomy and explosive. So we had to kind of get a little bit creative. I went out there to help them refine, the mic positions and the sound. Actually, before flying out there, Jonas, who's an amazing drummer, he's a producer, all the guys are very familiar with how to record. They're capable of recording themselves. He'd already mic'd up his kit and, he'd sent me little samples of a few of his different snares and different mic placements. But then when I went out there in person, I could kind of manhandle the microphones for myself. And that proved really useful, just to kind of get the raw tones, the last few percent up to, something that at least that I could find very usable in the mix. So the key really to getting the drums to sound a bit bigger was to use the adjoining space, which is like quite a reflective little room that they had set up as like, I guess, the control room, and that's where they had the computer. But it's actually really washy if you go in there. Like, it's got mirrors on the walls and marble floor, and it's just like, it's really reverberant actually. So that ended up being where we put the room mics, and kind of found the best spot for that. So you have the drums in the really dry room, and then this adjoining space with the room mics in it. So if I mute the room tracks, and also there is like a sample, like a snare sample that's triggering like an ambience thing on the snare. So if I mute that as well, you'll hear how dry the drums sound. But then if you hear the room tracks, so yeah, that was pretty key to getting the drums to sound more lively and more like a stadium. They still need to sound, big, even though we're going for the natural thing. There's a bit of kick sample. You can see there's a kick sample up here. It's peaking at a relatively similar volume to the main kick, I think. Touch louder. And it's providing more of the kind of clacky attack. Where the natural kick is more of like this kind of thick, kind of chubby sounding kick drum, and the two together kind of create that really nice thick low end and kind of clicky top end. So yeah, that's a little brief overview of the drums. Let's move on to the bass tone, which I think is killer on this. So when I flew out to Gothenburg, Johan made his way over from Stockholm to be with the rest of the band. He brought his Solar bass, which I thought sounded fantastic, and his Dark Glass Microtubes Infinity pedal. I think I got that right. That's what it was. And we kind of dialed in a bass tone, and we didn't, he already had a really cool tone that he was using for the demos that they've been doing. And actually, Johan wrote a lot of the basic tracks that became the songs on this record. He was a really key songwriter. So, a lot of the demos are him playing guitar as well. All of the guys, capable of doing good sounding demos and stuff on their own. So it's just so nice to work with people at that level. The bass tone, is super gnarly coming from that Dark Glass pedal. Unlike a lot of productions, I didn't feel the need to blend different signals like a DI. I mean, in that pedal, it's kind of doing that on its own. You are kind of blending between a distortion and a DI all in one. But it's quite common in metal production to see multiple tracks of bass in the session. It just wasn't necessary here. The way that we set up the pickups on the bass was kind of more for that like P-bass kind of really kind of mid-forwards, almost clanky sound, which I think works really well with the guitar tone, which is quite big and round. And yeah, just the two together, they just kind of they bind together so well. And by binding, I mean, I guess they just sound so unified when you play them all together, which I guess I'll do now. Let's check it out. So this is the intro riff with bass and guitars now. If I go to a bit that doesn't have the octaver on the guitars. And listening in solo, you can hear the imperfections, the live feel of the takes, and I think it's a lovely thing in the context of this production. You know, for some productions, everything just feels like it needs to be completely perfect and gridded, and for this record, it really felt like, it should feel like a live performance where it hasn't been punched in to death and edited and quantized to death. It's still really good performances, mind. But yeah, hopefully you can hear that effect of the guitars plus the bass together just becoming so... I don't know, there's something so satisfying about it. Especially, the octaver effect, which is on these primary rhythm guitar tracks that you hear in the intro, with the bass works really well. So to talk about the guitar tone now, the guitar tone is... So all the guitars in this session are basically neural captures of the guy's rigs. We ended up, for the rhythm tones, just using Tom's Überschall into his old Mesa Boogie 412 that he's used a lot live. It's kind of his main touring cab, so it's super broken in, sounds amazing. I think, but I might be wrong, that we also had Henrik's Coco Boost in front of the amp, but as I say it, I think I remember we tried it, and I think I remember that Tom didn't like it as much as plugging straight into the amp. So the capture is actually, I think it doesn't have that on. But basically, at the rehearsal space, they had all their rigs, and Henrik brought along even more of his stuff. He's a collector of gear of all sorts. So on Tom's side, I think we had like a 5150, his old Überschall, it's quite an early one, the Mesa Boogie cab and some pedals. And then on Henrik's side, he had, I want to say, maybe 4 cabs, like 3 Marshalls, and then this odd little cab that actually sounded really good, which, as I remember it, the story was it was like an importer or a guitar shop in Gothenburg that made their own cabs in-house and kind of fitted speakers to them. I think it was called Tompa, a Tompa 412. It had 90s, vintage 30s in it. It sounded really cool, but it didn't end up making the cut. But yeah, he also had his new Überschall, his Bogner Helios, which I think is modified, Soldano SLO. There were other amps as well that are just... not on my head. Oh, there was a modified Marshall, and I actually don't know who modded it. Anyway, we tried everything, and there were lots of cool tones. When it came to the mix, I found that I just really was happy with the sound of Tom's Überschall through that Mesa cab. Just really did it for me. And it's nice because I don't think that they've used their own amps and cabs on a record for a long time. And it's super valid for the producers, especially if you're traveling to a studio, to not go with all of your gear. But also, if the producer has their gear that they know super well, then it's totally valid to kind of use that. But I just think it adds to this authenticity that these are the sounds that the guys themselves selected and resonate with when they're playing through for real. So, it kind of feels like there's an extra, depth to the choice to use those sounds on the record. So that's the rhythm guitar sound. So the main ones have the octave on them. Verses don't have octave. In the chorus, there is actually a combination. So you've got the main rhythms don't have an octave. But there is a double, and actually I think the double's slightly louder than the mains, which does have the octave on, so you've kind of got... The octave sound is less dominant than it is in the intro, but it's still quite present and kind of works, again, with the bass really nicely. Yeah, and so you might be able to see, if you're into techie stuff, I've got the bass and the guitars routing through the same bus, so they're all kind of feeding through this one channel together. And there's a technique which a lot of metal producers use, which is to use a multi-band compressor to basically duck the low end and low mids of the guitars when there's a chug, so that it doesn't kind of sound suddenly muddy in the mix, because chugs have this kind of huge bloom of low end. what I decided to do on this record, and I've continued it onwards actually, is to do that not just on the guitars, but to do it on the sum of the guitars and the bass, so that effectively the low end is just really linear, because when the guitars aren't chugging, the bass can have more low end and low mids, and then when they are chugging, the bass is also getting ducked together, and it's all proportional to how much low end is coming off the guitars. And it's just, I'm really happy with what it did for the sound of this record, especially on some of the other songs that are really kind of chug heavy. I feel like the bass and the guitars just sit so nicely together without dominating the rest of the mix. So you'll see when it's playing that this band here is kind of bobbing up and down as the guitars chug. Or, I mean, the octaves have lots of low end on them as well, so they're probably going to be impacting on there. But yeah, just a really cool little trick that I've carried on to future productions as well.
Knowing without knowing, just knowing that it hurts. It's like you painted a picture without colors and inert. You spoke without phases, and I still hope to be heard. Say what you want.
Cool, let's proceed with the guitars. We've got the solos. So both Henrik and Tom take solos on this song. Different tones, and they did these on their own, on their own kind of rigs. So one second, I did actually find out from Jonas just before coming on here, from Tom and Jonas, which rig they used. So on Henrik's solo, he used a Rocktron Max, which I've not heard of, but I assume is some kind of preamp, into a Mesa 5050 power amp. So I guess that's probably a live cab then. And it's quite a kind of stratty sounding solo on his part. And then Tom's, I think he used actually a Neural DSP plugin for that. Let's check out the difference. So as you can hear in isolation, they are drastically different tones. And you might also notice they're panned ever so slightly to each side. So Tom's a little bit more, Henrik's is a little bit more on the left and Tom's a little bit more on the right. Just so, in the mix, tones that sound a little bit different in isolation can end up sounding identical. It's, once you put the other instruments in there, like the minor differences in the high end of the two tones for the different leads, can just kind of get absorbed into everything else, and it can end up being like you don't really notice that there's two soloists on there. So I always try when there are dual soloists to make sure that the two tones have quite a lot of difference in them. And in this case, they pretty much did that for themselves by providing two completely separately generated tones. Nice long echo throw on the end of Tom's solo there, just to kind of lead into the really sludgy bridge riff. And let's look at what's going on with the keys. There's a lot of different keys going on in here. But I think the star of the show, actually one of the kind of real focal points of the song for me, is that Hammond organ that you can hear, which is a real Hammond organ. The guys set up the full rig of synths and captured it all there in the rehearsal space. I just think that's so cool. For the Hammond, we've got two channels. We've got like the stereo, which I guess is at the top, and then the sub, which I'm guessing is at the bottom of the Hammond box. I just love Hammond organ. I think it works so well with distorted guitar as well. I think I remember in the mix too, I kept trying to turn it up louder. I mean, I think it's plenty audible, but I kept being like, come on guys, let's go really loud. And actually there was something, because the Hammond isn't playing, for example, in the bridge riff over here. I remember I kind of wanted to evoke a little bit of that feeling, and what I did is I got a plug-in Hammond. This is a really good UAD rotary cabinet thing, And I sent some of the guitars and not the bass. I thought I sent some bass, but I didn't. Some guitars to that in this section. So you actually have this blended in under the guitar sound. It's really subtle, but little touches like that make me happy when I'm working on something. So yeah, that's a little bit about the Hammond, but there's lots of other really cool parts going on in this. So let's see what's happening in the chorus. Sounding for the second verse there. Henrik's solo, there's fluffy strings underneath the solo section. Let's check those out. And it's not necessarily an easy task to make those things sound big and to not dominate the sound of the guitars as well. Like, that's kind of, we're just playing a game of little level adjustments and EQ stuff, jiggery-pokery to make sure that everything is audible at the same time. That, to me really adds to that kind of wall of sound character, which is this kind of live show experience that I really wanted the record to have. But yeah, just really cool parts thrown on these channels for the whole song, basically. And they add so much. If you heard the song without the keys, it's, it doesn't have anywhere near as much impact. So that's the synth tracks. There are also like drum loops and impacts that you can hear. So I'm a huge fan of tambourines, just quietly in the mix to help kind of push a beat on, especially if there's quite a lot of space in the drum beat and the riff's fairly slow. A tambourine kind of keeping time at, double the speed of the click can be a really good way to kind of make it feel like it's still got some forward movement. We've got, kind of like sweeps and swooshes and booms. And this is all stuff that the band themselves did as well. It's something I would add if they weren't there, but the guys are very experienced, as I say. Johan, I think in particular, does a lot of production in the kind of pop world, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was him that put these things together, but I'm not entirely sure. What's Garlic Press? I've just seen the name of that track. Doesn't sound anything like when I'm squeezing garlic, but hey, sounds cool. Again, like those layers along with the synths just do so much to elevate the production. Let's listen to some vocals. So the verses, there's really just the one lead vocal. There's no extra parts on it at all. There's just the one lead.
It's like echoes on the inside, your unspoken words. It's like knowing without knowing, just knowing that it hurts.
And that kind of slightly more exposed, vulnerable sound to the vocal, I just think is really nice, given how, that character I spoke about all the guys and about Tom and how honest and open they are. I mean, all of the lyrical content is really meaningful and deep stuff, and I feel like having that kind of quite exposed delivery is a really nice touch. So yeah, just one vocal during the verses. The choruses have a double on them.
Say what you want, say how you see this.
Which I am actually using a little bit of stereo widening on, a little bit of chorus, so that it's, adding a little bit of width to the lead vocal. But there are also some backing vocals down here.
Say what you want, say how you see this.
Which sound like pitch-shifted versions of Tom's voice. I mean, that I'm pretty sure that's pitch-shifted. That's not him singing. In in that range. I don't know if he's done a formant shift and sung it in that pitch, or if he's just pitch shifted his vocal, but I think the idea there is for it to sound not like a whole load of toms singing, and for it to have a bit of a kind of thicker quality to it. So,
say what you want, say how you see this, say before my heart is making me leave this.
I will say I really fell in love with the Baby Audio plugins for delays in this album mix in general, and they've continued to be real favourites of mine. I love how they've got the inbuilt ducker, and just the sound quality's brilliant, and the kind of transient design control as well within the, being able to kind of knock attack and add sustain to the repeats is so nice on a vocal where you don't necessarily want the echoes to be super hard edged. So I've got that on, there's an instance of that on the lead vocals and on the backing vocals. And they're also sending to really nice plate reverb as well. So
it's like you painted a picture.
So the reverb's getting the sound with the delay on it already, just to be clear. They're not being kept completely separate. I quite like what that does. And then there are some kind of vocal throws using this cool replica plugin that Dan Weller turned me onto a few years ago. Native Instruments plugin, and this diffusion mode just sounds really crazy for big throws.
Hope to be heard. Say what you.
Or over here.
Hurting.
And that's pretty much it. That's a top to bottom look, I guess, of the whole production. So, yeah, again, it was such a pleasure to work with these guys on this record, and I'm so pleased that the reaction to the singles and like the advance reviews of the record have been so strong as well, because I feel like it's a lovely body of work, and I've really enjoyed working and listening to it. So, yeah, I hope you found that interesting, and definitely check out the album when it's out.